This is Democracy Manifest.
Okay, so the question is, how do we think about security and privacy? Okay, so this is a broad topic. It's a little tricky to answer in just a 20-second catchphrase, but so we started off by saying, what are our privacy and security policies at a high level? And I said that it's hard to answer in a short answer. We actually have taken the time to try to condense them into short, high-level answers. And that's all available online now at the URL liquid.us/policies. So the first section is privacy and security. Just read it very briefly. Privacy and security are critical priorities for Liquid US. We operate on a few basic principles. Privacy is a basic right. It's fundamental. It's a human right. We only collect the minimum amount of user information to enable and express trustworthy voting and policy intention. Passwords are inherently difficult to secure. We never require you to create or remember a new password. Rather, we base authentication on the security of your email inbox, like most forgot password processes. And we employ as much encryption as possible, including TLS encryption for all data in transit and database encryption at rest. So that's high-level privacy and security policies, and now we can go into more details about each of these and other questions around this. But in general, we always want to do everything to make every person as secure as possible. But at a high level, we encrypt everything we can possibly encrypt. We don't ask. We try to minimize the amount of information we collect in every sort of way. And we always err on the side of protecting privacy in every situation at all times. So the basic premise is that we're trying to think really long term here. We want the entire infrastructure to be as trustworthy as we can possibly make it. And so any gaffe, any hole whatsoever gets in the way of that or sets us back. And so yeah, we're just extra careful as much as possible. And there's we do all the standard best practices. All data is always encrypted over transfer. Our databases themselves are encrypted at rest. The data access policy is as strict as it can possibly be. All your standard practices that you'd expect from any professional technology organization, and we develop these. The team working on this has worked on financial applications before and large scale other commercial applications. So we have a healthy amount of experience building these things out. And then we do a few things that are pretty innovative that really set us apart. One is that we don't have any passwords. We don't even ask people to make passwords. Passwords are insecure. Passwords are a shortcut in any interface to allow somebody else to take over your account. So like if you wanted to grant somebody access to your account, you do it by sharing your password with them. And if they ever discover, for massive number of people, they reuse the same password across multiple services, or it's a very computationally simple password. You can measure the entropy, which is like how much computational noise or randomness is introduced in your password. And so most people, your standard password is not really great. And so rather than expecting people to come up with a strong password in the first place, keep and somehow store it in a strong place, and not accidentally give access to somebody else, not allow somebody else to discover their password accidentally, whether because of somebody breaches their system, or somebody has a keylogger, or somebody's already on their system, or what have you. What we do is, it's similar to, there's all these forgot your password tools, and so we just default to your email address is your authentication. it's not that knowing your email address is the authentication. It's that being able to access an email that you have received is your authentication. So we send a message to that email address, and you can click a link or see the code within the email. Just to be perfectly clear here, you need to know more than what the email address is. You need to have access to that email. And then we, by default, especially when you're wanting to verify, we also double that up with a text message verification. So you get sent, as a second factor, you get sent a text message and with random 6-digit code, and you have to type in the code that you received to your phone. So there are some ways that we can continue to strengthen and improve that system as well, and we plan on doing that in the future. But yeah, the general philosophy is always make things easy while also making sure that things are always secure and protected, and minimize data disclosures as much as possible. But yeah, I mean, it's hard problems, and we welcome all the thoughtful suggestions and critiques of anything we're doing right now. We want to make this all as strong and trustworthy as possible. And so the more outside perspectives we're getting and ideas, the better, the stronger. But at the same time, there are these balancing acts with wanting to also provide transparency. So if you're thinking about it from a theoretical point of view, the other extreme would be everything is totally public all the time. Like our members of Congress, every time they cast a vote, everybody knows exactly how they vote and everything. And so there's this balancing act between privacy and transparency. And our general philosophy is default to privacy and give people the tools to be more public when they explicitly want to be.
Compare digital voting systems versus paper voting systems. Can digital voting systems be more secure?
Yeah, digital can be secure for sure. For context here, our entire economy, I mean, the vast majority of our economy is digital at this point. Every time we use a credit card, that's 100% digital. The stock market is entirely digital, trillions of dollars of value is being transferred every day. So if the premise out there is that digital is inherently insecure, I mean, that's just patently untrue. If you look at the world around us, and as the world has worked and existed for going on almost 40 years now. And now that's not to say that digital is flawless by any means. Of course, there's all sorts of problems that can be introduced. So you asked this great point about having like an audit record, being able to, the prompt is in a current paper voting system, there is a physical record of what the vote looked like. And so you can go back and audit that. That's true for the most part. I mean, of course, there are problems with that as well. I mean, the vote can be destroyed. I mean, the ballot can be lost. Extra ballots can be added to the ballot box. I mean, there's lots of examples even today of ballot stuffing going on around the world. So you need the technique to prevent against that is to have the actual ballot boxes themselves. You have election watchers, you have volunteers, ideally one representing each candidate at every single precinct. So if you have a polling place, in our city, we have 200 odd polling places just throughout the city. And so you'd want one volunteer election watcher for the entire time the ballot box is open, making sure that only legitimate ballots from legitimate voters are being added to the ballot box. And then, so even with all that said, so the ballot's gonna be lost, then you don't actually know if they're being tabulated. So the current systems, commonly we will have a system now where your ballot has a number on the top of it, and so you can go to a website and you can type in the code and make sure that the code that you entered is reported as having been entered, as having that ballot having been received and having been counted. If you want to be, the most hardcore about security, just some website run by the election authorities telling you, yes, that ballot was counted isn't really, you're still taking them at their word. Their system could be falsely reporting that. So that's not really all that great. So what you can do, from a digital perspective, we have faced issues like this before. So all of the infrastructure that runs the vast majority of the internet was originally built by open source communities. So like the Linux operating system is running a super majority of all the servers in the world, powering the internet, powering the banks, and powering the hospitals, and powering everything, powering the power plants. And the key there is that you are able to identify the code that's running on your own machine, and you can compile the code to the extent you want that's running on your own machine. And so our Liquid system also allows for all the same stuff. Our platform, all the client interface is totally open source, and we want there to be multiple interfaces basically to use it. So you could run your own, or you could use existing ones where you trust the system, just like the way the email works with SMTP. With that said, there's this other side of the problem is you want to make sure that the votes are only being counted from legitimate voters. So exactly, it's the same problem as ballot stuffing, right? So you want to make sure that the only votes that are getting entered are from legitimate people. And so mathematically, or as far as anyone has currently come up with, there is no decentralized way to maintain a list of approved participants. Such a list needs to be logically centralized. All of this information, though, all the votes that are being tabulated can be published to decentralized records. So our data scheme is what we call proof of vote. This isn't currently in production on the current Liquid platform, and that's a bit of a shame for a number of reasons. The reality of it is that we've been talking to lots and lots of voters and activists and representatives, and they just haven't prioritized this compared to a lot of other things that they want. Proof of vote is in beta testing right now, and there are a lot of benefits of it. As we've been testing it, we just want to make sure that everything's working smoothly and that it's still preserving privacy properly for everyone involved. And it's developing really, really well, and it ought to be much more widely in production across all issues soon. We're kind of taking it on like a initiative by initiative basis. So certain items that are being voted upon, we're turning it on for, so that we can make sure that it works right. And as we add more items, we're scaling it up so that we can turn it on for all items. But it's very promising. But the basic idea, the basic plan, is that every time you cast a vote, or anytime you cast a vote, we publish it to a public record of all of the public votes on this issue. And so your name isn't necessarily included. It's up to you whether you want your name to be publicly included or not. But every vote has a unique vote ID. And so that looks like B58321C86, some unique string of letters and numbers, hexadecimal. And so you can you can see it's just a list of ID. This is the list for this particular item. So you see ID and then yay, or ID nay, ID abstain, ID yay. And then that document itself is published and signed cryptographically. So you can, and remirrored. So we're not the only source to get that document. We're the only ones publishing to it right now, but we're not the only source sharing it. So you could verify against that record. And then anytime you actually cast your vote, is now getting back to the beginning of the way you laid out the problem. You want there to be a record. So when you cast your vote, we very simply just give you a vote receipt, send you an email that says your vote is B5862381. Yay, here it is. You can see it just got added to the public record of all the votes. And right now that system needs to be checked manually. And so we invite, it's a great thing if people can find cases where it's not working, where there's a discrepancy between what they expect it to show and what it is showing. Please do raise that issue. But in the future, I think what the ideal digital democratic system would allow for is client interface users would actually be able to add cryptographically signed messages. So there's this idea of cryptographic signatures, and every user would actually be able to say, yes, I checked the public record of all the votes and confirmed that my unique vote ID with my vote has been added. And that entire process would be automated, and then that proof would be signed with their cryptographic signature. So it's kind of a long-winded answer. Does that get to what you're asking about?
Yeah, I have a few follow-up questions. One is, sounds like you have the ability to, through your platform, people can verify that their own votes were cast. But I have two questions. One is, can you verify that other people's votes were cast correctly? And also, how do we know that behind the scenes, the people who work at Liquid US or some other third party aren't adding additional votes to the ledger that don't actually correspond to any real voter? But the problem is no one independently can check them since they only have the power to check their own votes. How do we deal with those challenges?
Right. So I just wanted to tackle one question at a time. So the first question is, can you verify somebody else's vote? If you know their vote ID, if they showed you a vote receipt, you can verify that the ledger, the public ledger of all the votes, contains that vote ID and that correct vote. And the document, the public ledger of all the votes is constantly updating. It's stored using a version control system. And so you can see every revision. You can see as it's evolving over time. So you can see when there's ever any discrepancies introduced or any problems like that. And so you can't just willy-nilly say, hey, did XYZ person vote? You'd have to have their vote receipt to be able to confirm whether or not they entered it. And that's partly a privacy issue. I mean, again, if they choose to vote publicly, and they always have that choice, then you would be able to see in the ledger, okay, this vote is attached to this public name. So all the public votes, you can see who they're by. But we're used to voting systems that are private. When we cast our vote for who's going to be our representative, or we cast a vote in a citizen referendum and ballot initiatives, those votes themselves are private. And so again, that's that trade-off between total transparency, where you can see everybody else's votes, and protecting individual voter privacy. So that's your first question. The second question is, how do we make sure that there isn't ballot stuffing going on, whether by the administrators of the Liquid platform or by some nefarious agents. I mean, let's assume that the administrators are perfect angels. Systems do get compromised occasionally, and it's very important that we're not simply trusting the good intentions of the administrators, but that we have some sort of record of, if there is an intrusion, can we see that the system wasn't compromised, or the system was compromised rather. Yeah, so the simple answer is that especially over time at scale, this becomes a lot less of an issue because you know exactly how many votes there are supposed to be. And so throwing in a lot of extra votes doesn't, there's no room to add a lot of extra votes because you already know how many citizens there are supposed to be. So you'd see the numbers, massively jump if a lot of extra votes were added. Early on, there'd be more of an issue if you have a lot of room to grow. If there's a lot of unclaimed voter accounts, let's say, you can't just quickly identify that there's a problem there. The best answer is that you have third-party risk limiting audits, which is the exact same best practice when it comes to verifying paper ballots and existing voter systems. But basically, you take a sample of the existing votes and you can mathematically calculate if there are 100,000 votes and you sample 50,000 of them and you don't come up with a single problem, what's the chance? That gives you 99.999% confidence that there aren't any other problems. So talking about risk limiting audits, I give this example. The math is a little bit unclear here. I give this example of checking 50% of the votes, but that's not realistic. What you'd really check is 1% of the votes, and you'd look at a totally random sample, and as long as they're a representative sample and 100% of them check out, then you have some probability that it extrapolates to a larger set. So it ought to be much faster. If you can check 50% of them, then you can probably check all of them relatively easily. But that would be total overkill. I mean, the way the math works out, you ought to be able to check far fewer than necessary and still have much greater confidence. So there's this whole field of study of auditing. What sort of sample do you need to take in order to get a representative sample? And this is the same question that's being asked with polls. Same thing about, is this representative or not? And so on. So there's a formula there for risk limiting audits. But yeah, basically you just... Yeah, and so the audit needs to be performed by a semi-trusted third party. It could look like the way the current system sort of happens with the vote watchers, where the auditors are sort of like representatives of the major parties or the major constituencies at play. And the more auditors you have, the better, because as long as not all the auditors are colluding, then everyone else can feel confident about their collective audit. It would also be good if the auditors are like somewhat non-attached organizations, like your standard accounting firms, your traditional financial auditors, for example. And their job would basically just be to check the Liquid platform's internal records for each vote. Do they have documentation? Is there documentation that proves that the vote came from a real voter, and they prove that that it is that real voter, and so on and so forth? And even better, you would go and actually ask that voter, do they have their receipt that proves it? And so basically you just want to use statistics to be able to test the claims of the system and make sure that there aren't any discrepancies. Just to be clear, I'm saying you want to have additional auditors that are not attached to any particular partisan outcome. You could have, it would be easy to expect having auditors that have a ton invested in the outcome, and so that's where you get all the political party auditors. And additionally, it'd be good to have some unbiased, nonpartisan auditors. The more auditors, the better. This is getting down another layer deeper, but there is a system where, again, so public votes are totally easy. Public votes are easy to check because you can just ask the person, you see the name of the public vote and you see we're not concerned right now. The premise that digital voting is impossible totally ignores the reality that Congress itself has been using digital systems to vote for decades. Right now, when they take a vote in the halls of Congress on trillion-dollar budgets, massive issues, the representatives, the legislators, are pressing buttons in a digital system. There's a yay button, a nay button, a present button, an abstain button, and a present button. And so there's already, our government is already being run by digital voting systems. The reason why most people aren't concerned about that whatsoever is because there is zero expectation of privacy in that system. When congressmen, take your pick, whenever a congressperson votes for an issue, their name is always attached to it. So they themselves, there's a public record being published by the Congress itself, by the body that runs Congress, and they would immediately sound the alarm if they thought they were voting one way and it turns out it got recorded another way. So public votes, we don't have to worry about too much. There's a little bit of, are they actually checking? You could imagine if there was a software bug there, I'd be curious how long it would take for someone to notice. So we can sort of rule out the entire, so now we've taken care of the entire class of security questions related to public votes. The other class are private votes. So the current privacy model on the current Liquid US platform is your name is not published with your vote, except the platform itself does see it. And that's not ideal by any means. In a ideal world, you'd have even stronger privacy where nobody sees it except yourself. It is truly a private vote. And also by default, your legislator sees your vote. We're adding the option to even opt out of your legislator being able to see how you vote, but they're in general not at all receptive to the idea of constituents voting privately and them having no idea if they can actually verify that these are their constituents or not. But so in the long term, it would be really great if somebody out there seeing this wants to help build out this project. But there are a number of cryptographic schemes proposed, crypto systems proposed for truly private voting, and a few implemented it in practice already. And they're based around, it's a combination of a few different encryption technologies, but the basic way it works is you create your vote. So you think of your vote as instead of a paper ballot, it's a digital ballot, but it has the item you're voting on and the position, yay or nay or abstain, a timestamp, let's say. 3 pieces of data. Now you take that vote, let's call this the payload, the vote itself, and you encrypt the entire vote, the entire document, basically. And the equivalent to that is sort of like wrapping it in an envelope, in a sealed envelope. You're sealing it up in such a way that now you can give the encrypted vote to somebody else, but as long as they don't have the decryption keys, they can never open the envelope, and so they can't actually see what the body of the vote said. And so they would know, oh, I was just given this encrypted vote, and they would know who gave it to them because there's no, Well, there are some methods that you could use Tor or some other proxy service to send messages, but that's taking a step further. Even without needing to do that, you could basically wrap your vote in this encryption, and that can all happen on your own machine, on the client, without needing to send anything up. And now what you want to do, you'd send all your votes to one party. Just be clear, when I use the word party, I don't mean political party. I mean like group that you're saying, just audience that you're saying this to, in the sense of like first party versus third party. A little confusing, mixing political terminology with technical terminology, but party just means entity, person, anything. That party, I mean, you'd send your vote, everyone would send their encrypted vote to a single party. That party would collect all these encrypted votes. Let's say there's 100 of them, and then they would randomize the order. They'd shuffle them up. And of course, they would know what order they received them in. They'd have, on their computer, they'd have the documentation of what order they originally received them in, but now they'd create a new order that is different. And then they'd give that new order to another party. And that party would shuffle them up again, randomize the order. And then they'd give all the newly shuffled to another party, and they'd randomize them again. So it's like you have a deck of playing cards all face down, and each person is shuffling them. And you hand the next person, and they shuffle them. You hand the next person, they shuffle them. You hand the next person, they shuffle them. You want to do it a number of times. And then after, this is called a mixnet, because it's a network of people that are mixing up the contents of the message together. And after it's been passed to a sufficient number of people, or computers, because you'd want this all to happen very quickly in an automated fashion, they would all at the end say, okay, we see that it's now been shuffled 25 times or 50 times or how many times. Now I sign off on this final version that the last person publishes. Okay, I've now been given a 25 or 50 times over shuffled list. Here's that public list. Publish all the vote envelopes then. And then each person would provide basically a decryption key. By each person, I mean each of the shufflers are providing a decryption key, not every voter. The voters are already done once they submit their envelopes. They don't need to be a part of this process at all. This is all just the shufflers are doing this part. But the way this decryption key works, it uses this secret sharing method, this key sharing method. So you need everyone together, all the 50 people, to confirm that they did their part in shuffling it, and it would be targeted just to that last shuffle. And so all of their keys would be combined together, and they would all have to say, yes, I did my part shuffling it. And then you'd be able to unencrypt all the envelopes. You know, the box has been shaken up sufficiently that now you have the 50-part key to open it up. And then you would be able to tally all of the votes without the original identity of any of the votes being revealed. So that's at a high level, the basic idea of the scheme. Of the crypto system. We haven't implemented this ourselves. There's at least one system out there being used right now it's called Helios, Helios, like the Greek god of the sun, voting system, created by Ben Adida. And I believe there are other schemes out there, other crypto systems out there that have been written about. But the point is that it ought to be theoretically and computationally possible to allow for truly private votes where even the platform can't see what the content of the message is. And eventually we'd like to move in that direction. That's the way democracy ought to be run.
So I think too, a lot of people, especially people who don't have as much of a background in technology, it could be hard for them to understand the distinction between kind of cryptographic proof of vote systems you're talking about, something like a blockchain or a cryptocurrency. Could you explain the relationship that the technology you've developed and the security apparatus you've built has to do with those two other things?
Yeah.
Does Liquid US, is it built on a blockchain?
Yeah, great question. So the term blockchain is a bit of a marketing term more than a scientific term. There's competing definitions for what a blockchain means. Let's put it that way. So especially in 2018 and 2017, there was this massive economic frenzy of ICO mania, the initial coin offerings, all these people marketing, selling their own cryptocurrency, their own coins built on top of blockchain technologies, and using these as these fundraising tools. And there's something, I think the estimate was like $6 billion raised. I mean, quite a significant amount of money as far as private tech investing goes. Relatively significant amount of money. And so that's what a lot of people think of when they think of blockchains, because that's where the term was being used again and again and again and again and again. Invest in our blockchain, invest in this blockchain. And it's most famously popularized by Bitcoin and the Bitcoin blockchain. There's a competing strain of thought that I personally am more of a fan of that says that the basic idea of the blockchain has actually been around for a lot longer, since the 90s at least, if not sooner, if not maybe the 80s. I'm blanking a little bit on the dates now. But yeah, the basic idea, it's like which parts of the blockchain are important to you, right? So the key ideas, in my opinion, about what make up a blockchain are you have a chronologically ordered list of transactions referred to as blocks. So in the Bitcoin world, these are coming every 10 minutes. And it's a list of them. It's a chain. It's a timeline of them, a chain of them. And each one is, we talk about these being secured. So they're cryptographically hashed against the previous one. So they use a blockchain as a data structure where you can be confident that this latest unit of work, this latest transaction, this latest block, it came after these previous blocks. And so those part of the key to the data structure. One aspect of it, the way the Bitcoin blockchain is implemented right now and the Ethereum blockchain is implemented for the most part, some minor exceptions, and a lot of the blockchains that people think about, is that they're also completely transparent. So every last transaction is out there for everyone. The identifiers are usually also these hexadecimal digits like B5683216ADE. And so they're not necessarily using real names, but every identity is attached to every transaction. So there's not as much privacy as people would hope for in some systems. And then the other quality that's really significant for certain, depending on your use case, the other quality for Bitcoin is that there's no single party that controls who gets to write. There's a notion of the longest chain. There's a lot of different parties, a lot of different nodes, as they're referred to, different computers, are all racing each other to be able to write to the chain. And the way they do that is by playing this random guessing game where they try to find a magic number that meets this tiny window of possibilities. And if they find the magic number, they get paid out a certain number of Bitcoins. So this is referred to as mining Bitcoins. And then they get to be the author of the next 10 minutes worth of transactions, the next block worth of transactions. And so the really powerful idea here is that this blockchain doesn't exist on any one entity's servers. This isn't like Facebook's databases or Google's databases or Twitter's databases or the government of France's databases. This is just the global blockchain. There's no single party that controls it. And that's a really powerful idea. And it's especially valuable when the goal is to create this decentralized money, this decentralized currency. Our system is not trying to create decentralized money. Right now, we're trying to provide a record of what a individual community's sentiment is, how many people are in favor, how many people are opposed, how many people are undecided or neutral on a variety of different questions. And so right now it's actually not that important that itself, it doesn't even make sense for that list of votes to be written to by multiple parties. There will come a day in which it does make a lot of sense, but we're not really there yet. It's really valuable to get something in the hands of people, to get something to people that's working first. I believe it's really valuable to get something. There are other parts of this problem that are much more important. And so right now, every single voter needs to be confirmed as a registered voter. So in the Bitcoin blockchain world, it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter whether you're a human. It doesn't matter if one person wants to run thousands of different computers or millions of different computers or just one computer. It just matters that they have the hashing power. All that matters is how much CPU power you have. And so that's a different requirement. For our requirements, we do need to confirm voter identity. And so right now, we are the only party that can write to our official ledger, all the proof of votes, because we need to sign off and say, yes, this person has proven their voter registration. So in order to do that, we use a much simpler technology that's been around for a long time called Git, G-I-T. And Git is most famously used as source code management, as version control management. It was invented by Linus Torvalds, the person that originally founded the Linux project, and it manages the entire Linux project, and it manages the massive amount of all the open source code in the world. And the point of it is that it also gives you all these transactions. The Git calls its transactions commits. When someone says, this is what I want to add to the code base, is one giant document that everyone's adding to together. I mean, it might be split up into multiple files, but you can imagine it as a series of files. And someone says, I want to add these lines or I want to subtract these lines. That's basically the equivalent of, we want to add this line of new votes. And the way Git works, every commit has a unique cryptographic hash, and every commit references all the previous ones in the timeline. And so you can always be sure the ordering. And so the question is Git a blockchain? And my opinion is yes, absolutely. It is a chain of blocks secured by cryptography that provides total transparency and all sorts of other wonderful benefits. The one thing it doesn't have is proof of work. It doesn't have this game of the computers trying to race each other to see who can solve the math problem first. And there are other systems that are referred to as blockchains theoretical ideas like these proof of stake systems, where instead of racing to solve the math problem with your CPUs, you just put down money and all the other parties say, we approve or deny. And if all the other parties think that there's some hiccup, then you would lose the money. These are unfortunately still theoretical systems for now. They're not really working. As far as I understand, nobody's gotten them working quite yet. But Git is a system that already works. It's powering all the open source in the world, basically, nearly. And so, yeah, it's great. And there's already interfaces that work really well for it, so people can explore and link to this stuff and share this stuff and comment on this stuff and raise issues. So, yeah, it's a non-traditional answer, but it's actually very battle-tested software and processes that give us all the properties we want. And and then on top of that, because the source code it's very easy. So GitHub interface for Git software makes it really easy to fork ledgers, to fork repositories, source code repositories of data. And so it's quite easy for other people to then basically mirror the ledger that we've published. And so it helps protect against the administrators that have the ability to write to the public record in case someone goes rogue internally or it gets infiltrated, God forbid. As long as there are other mirrors that are always maintaining distributed records of what they expect, then it would be immediately obvious to everyone that something wrong is going on here. And so we've provided software. We've already written a bunch of software to make it incredibly easy to run a mirror and keep it up to date so that it resyncs every few minutes, and it doesn't really take up almost any computational power or anything like that. But it's the digital equivalent of election watchers. It's the digital equivalent of those people who sit at the ballot box and watch the ballot box and make sure that nothing too fishy is going on. And so each new person that becomes a mirror is adding more reliability into the proof of vote, the distributed ledger of votes, and helping assure other people that there isn't this single point of failure, that this is distributed and therefore more stable because of that and resilient because of that.
So in addition to the fact that Git is more stable, or using distributed version controls is more stable because all of these other people can have copies of the records that we're producing. My question is, does the fact that we're using Git open us up to additional vulnerabilities? Is Git hackable?
No.
Is that even a coherent question?
No.
Should I not even?
No, it's good. No, it's a good question. Is Git hackable?
I'm just trying to. So you said like the platform we built relies on Git, on using this distributed control system, version control system. That does not create any additional security vulnerabilities, though.
No. It's possible to impersonate. So Git is based again around these ideas of commits. Every commit has a commit author, so a name and an email address. And that is a self-reported value. So I can create a commit that looks like it was authored by Abraham Lincoln. It says, author Abraham Lincoln. It's just self-reported. And so the concern would be, in an unsophisticated version of this, the concern would be that one of these mirrors or someone else out there is claiming that the list that they have that says is being published, being authored by Liquid US, they're claiming it's authentic, but in fact they faked it, that they wrote in a different author. So there's a relatively simple solution for this. This isn't a new problem. See, again, the nice thing about using Git is that the Linux project and all the many, many, many other things that use it, including NASA and Google and almost every large software project you can imagine, and lots and lots of open source, and so many things have all faced these same questions before. And so Git has built-in support for cryptographically signed commits. So again, using these same systems of digital signatures where as long as nobody has access to the cryptographic private key that corresponds to that signature, you can be sure that the commit, as long as it's a signed commit, is actually authored only by people in possession of that key. And so, there's no, that's like as strong as it gets mathematically, computation, and it's very, very strong. In terms of like trying to brute force that system, we're talking about it would take far longer. If you had every computer on Earth trying to crack it, it would still take longer than until the sun blows up and other things like that. It's pretty strong. The degree of security we're talking about here is much higher than the existing systems. Again, just keep in mind that the existing system does have lots and lots of single points of failure already. So each legislator is a human being that can be coerced either with bribes. The most blatant way would be, we'll give you this money and you vote how we want. The little bit more sophisticated way would be, this is how we want you to vote, and if you do the right thing, then we'll have this job lined up for you when you leave office. Which, if you just look at how many people take these very high paying jobs after, sure looks like that seems to be going on. Or they could be coerced in the other direction with threats, hold a gun to their head, or some awful situation like that, or other ways in which they're being blackmailed, or whatever sort of ways people get coerced. And so every single legislator is already susceptible to that. And then on top of that, like, we have this premise of, you can contact your legislator, but the way in which you contact them is not being verified whatsoever. So if somebody had enough resources, they want to basically, create an astroturfing campaign is what this would be called, impersonate lots of people. They could write a huge number of letters and claim to be, you can get a list of who all the constituents are and claim to be all these people and defraud them and send all the letters to the Congress people. And that's the way Congress has been telling us the way that it works and the way that individual citizens are supposed to influence it for hundreds of years. It's actually free. You can mail, at least they can mail constituents. I'm not positive if you can mail them for free, but it's built into the American government system that there's free mail for Congress. But that itself is not verified. It's very hard to make sure that's coming from the right person. And now the same thing with digital tools, whether calling in or sending an email. That's not actually being verified. The thing that they usually claim to be doing is to check, are you when you reach out, you have to say, I am your constituent and I live at XYZ address. But again, just knowing that information would invalidate it. So anyone that's, Amazon has a list of every last person in their address in the country, and so on and so forth. So the point is, the system that we are creating for digital democratic infrastructure deserves to be, and I believe can be, far stronger and more secure and more auditable than the systems that we have in place right now, by orders of magnitude.
Okay, I just have one or two more questions. How are we doing on time?
Doing great.
Cool.
I have no idea.
Energy. How are we doing with energy levels?
I'm fine.
Can keep going? Okay, cool. How do you, not so much prove the identity of your voters, but what information do they have to supply to you when they register for the site and when they want to vote for things? And how do you use that information to really verify that they are who they say they are?
Totally. Yeah, so this is by far the hardest problem if you ask me. I mean, the other hard problem is getting enough people to know about the system and want to start using it. But from a technical point of view, from a logistical point of view, this is the hardest problem. And tried a bunch of different variations. There are a lot of different possibilities, and we're going to continue to build on it. But I can speak to what we're doing right this second that we've arrived at after a number of iterations. What we do is when you sign up, we ask you to self-report your name and your address. And you type in your name and your address, and we can verify against the official voter rolls maintained by all the secretaries of state that there is indeed a registered voter with that name and that address. Then, so that's step one, is you claim you're a registered voter. Is there actually a registered voter? Step two is to somehow prove, are you actually this person who you claim to be? Because unfortunately, you could just type in a thing and say you're actually, anyone can go and say they're Barack Obama on the internet. And so what we do right now, the simplest method, there's a bunch of different methods, but the simplest method for regular citizens is you also have to provide a cell phone number. And with the cell phone number, you type in your cell phone number, we send it a 6-digit verification code, and you type in the verification code, which proves that you are in control of that cell phone number. And then we can confirm the name attached to the cell phone number caller ID record. And so that is an extremely quick way to get information to have a identity verification method that applies to a massive percentage of the population, and is relatively low cost, and is very quick and relatively easy, and doesn't ask too much personal information. There are other methods that fall on a whole range of easier or more secure or more accessible applies to more people. And we basically and our long-term vision is to provide a number of different options. So for some people, the cell phone doesn't work. There are 15% of the population in America, something like that don't have cell phones. We're not in any way trying to intentionally disenfranchise people because they choose not to have a cell phone. There are people whose cell phone might be purchased by their company or something like that, and so the caller ID doesn't work. And so we want to have other methods. The ones we're the most excited about, there are some simple ones. So if you are already a verified on Twitter person, so I mentioned the example of Barack Obama earlier, we want to also make it really easy. If Twitter has already done the work of verifying you in this public account, that would be another way that you can get into the system. If you if you're in control of a first name, last name at some university.edu school account, we haven't done all the testing to make sure this works, but that seems like it ought to be a really promising and quick method. The gold standard, but a very, very strong method that reaches just about every last person and ought to be really, really secure is to actually send a postcard in the mail to the address of the registered voter with a unique code on it. The issue there is twofold. One, it costs. It's not free to send a custom postcard to people. It takes a lot of work. It would end up costing us. We have systems that we can use to outsource a lot of the hard work, but it would still end up costing us about 50 cents per person, which we can't afford to do ourselves right now. So we sort of see this as like, it'd be great if there are other people that could help cover the cost of that, like grants or large sponsors, or people have suggested that they would donate money, put in money to donate to contribute to that. It would also be possible that you could just pay for yourself. So you could do a very quick $1 PayPal or Venmo or cryptocurrency transaction, or just type in your credit card number. So it's relatively easy for us to do all of those systems. We want the verification methods to be free as much as possible to the end user. So that's, although it reaches a lot of people, that the cost of it is makes it not ideal. The other issue with it is that it's not very fast. I mean, it takes multiple days for the postcard, once it's been initiated, to actually arrive. And then the person has to remember, and they have to go back and remember this whole context that they're in and everything like that, and things like that. So it's not an ideal first choice, but we do want to have that as a backup option. Another way that, especially for people already in office, that is relatively easy, is basically you come in person to this physical office and you show your ID card. So a lot of people suggest, can we just take a picture of our driver's license, take a picture of a passport? That's really not secure. Unfortunately, that can be faked quite easily. It's pretty easy to Photoshop pictures of driver's licenses and write different names in there. And even in any case, just having, you can scan the barcode, and that's a whole nother system, but just knowing what is on somebody's driver's license does not prove that they are that person. In the same way that anytime, there are a number of apps that, in order to sign up, required me to scan a picture of my driver's license, and now any one of those apps wouldn't, they have a record in their database of what my driver's license looks like, and so any one of them would be able to create a massive number of fraudulent accounts on Liquid if that was in itself enough of an identity verification method. So we're always trying to look at all these different options and balance provide options that meet the different requirements of accurate, is trustworthy enough, is quick enough, is cheap for everyone involved, and doesn't ask too much personal information. Some people think, what if you give social security numbers? People don't really want to give their social security number too much. Same thing with asking for credit card numbers. That was an issue. We were trying to do that earlier. It worked in some cases, but it was just creating too much of a barrier for people. So we don't want to be asking for too much private information. We want to ask for the minimum amount of private information. Even though the way we actually implement it, we never actually got it. It was getting passed on to the credit card processor immediately in this fancy, embedded iframe way. There was no possible way for our computer system to actually get it, but that's neither here nor there. The point is that our current approach is to have a number of methods, and then to just be transparent in the log, in the ledger of all the votes. Okay, this vote has also been phone verified, and has also been postcard verified, or has also been the email, the first name, last name @edu email address method verified, or what have you. And so again, all of these are a huge step above the current systems of constituent communication. And we want to be transparent, and we again invite help and advice and critiques and all the things to make the system as strong as possible, because it is a very, very large problem. There are all sorts of papers written about this by large think tanks for how can the government do this at scale. And that really gets to what the real solution ought to be. The real solution, and the best solution, would be that the government itself, who's already managing all these voter rolls, also adds on a way to authenticate, whether that's as simple as collecting an email address as part of your voter registration as well. And so you can sign up and they can ask you permission. Hey, can I share? It's sort of like login with Facebook. It'd be like login with the government system. And so there are a number of other countries that do this. So in France, they have a system, France Connect. It's still it's being used for government systems. They haven't quite opened it up to civic projects yet. But in Estonia, they have this e-citizenship. And in the Estonian system, every person gets a digital ID card. So they actually get a physical private key that they can use in their systems to prove who they are. And that's really powerful. I mean, we actually have those on our passports, but they're not equipped for this sort of thing yet. But the ideal solution moving forward is to extend the existing voter registration infrastructure to be able to do this. And that would be incredibly valuable for so many use cases. It would make banking cheaper. Banking has to do a lot of know your customer business and all sorts of online communities. And it would help prevent a lot of fraud going on online as well. So that's definitely the wave of the future. There are a number of other countries experimenting with these systems. There's been some talk of it in the US, but it hasn't really gotten there yet. But yeah, it's an ongoing issue, and we just want to be transparent about, we want to make it easy to provide different options and be transparent about what verification steps people have done. And we can have our own official line of what we think is a good bar. And then at the end of the day, it's also up to the reps that are taking on this feedback to say, okay, this is what I require, or this is what I have these very minimum requirements, or I have these very high requirements. And we just want to make that whole interaction as easy as possible.
Talk about how the role that Proxy plays in this equation. On Liquid US, can you see when someone proxies to you? Can you see their identity when they unproxy to you? Can you see who your proxy to, and vice versa, all the way down the chain of proxies? What if I trust the person who I'm proxy to, but I don't know who they've then proxied to next? How do you deal with issues of privacy and security when it comes to proxy?
Yeah.
There's a lot of questions.
100%. Yeah, so we had some initial thoughts of what we thought. We had an initial design of what we thought the best answer would look like. We've improved upon that, I'd like to think, relatively recently, but we haven't talked about it publicly since we improved upon it too much. That was about maybe 3 months ago, around New Year 2019, maybe a little bit earlier than that. Can't remember the details now, but the basic answer is that by default, you can only adopt votes from a proxy that are public. Our new system, we used to have these three levels of privacy. So we had utterly public. Everyone in the whole world can see your name attached to the way you voted. And we had totally private. Nobody could see your vote. It's just one person. And then we had this in-between stage of people that you have approved can see your vote. And so maybe I shouldn't get into too many details about the way it used to be, rather than just talking about the way it is now. But we've simplified it quite a bit, and it's much easier and much easier to talk about and explain and all that. And so let me just illustrate how it's easier to explain by explaining it. But basically, anytime you vote, you get two options: vote publicly, vote privately. If you vote privately, that vote has a voting power of 1 because you're only voting for yourself. If you vote publicly, that voting power will be cast for yourself, and all of the people that have already said that they look to you as a leader, as someone that they want to represent them. And so it's calculated. You can see it right there on the fly when you have this option. when you are casting your vote, you can see if I cast publicly, this is what the voting power would be, or if I cast privately, the voting power would be 1. And you can change it after the fact, and we want to bake in, you can change it after the fact, but yeah, basically only public votes are getting passed to people proxying to your constituents. And so it's this trade-off that you're making between influence and privacy. Just like right now we have this sort of dynamic with politicians, our elected leaders when they cast their votes in order to represent lots of people, they need to be totally public. Every vote that an elected representative casts is totally public. But for regular citizens, most of us vote privately, and it's important. Privacy in voting is very important for a number of reasons. The simplest and most powerful one that I think about now is just that you don't want to. Sometimes people have very strong feelings about political issues, and you don't want it to get in the way of like jobs. People just it affects a large number of people choose not to bring up politics in the workplace or publicly because they don't want to negatively affect their livelihood and their family, and that's a reasonable position to take. There are other people that choose not to take that position, but it's a reasonable position to take, and so it's very important that people have the option to participate politically with some level of privacy as well. And so that's the basic dynamic. So then what that would lead one to believe, so you asked this follow-on question, or this sort of nuanced question there about multiple layers of proxies. And that is an incredibly powerful potential of a liquid democratic system, where you could imagine, when we have a foreign policy decision in front of us, what do we do about this particular rogue actor in this tiny corner of the world where we've had this long history of involvement with them? We have some role to play here. The average citizen, the average person, more likely than not, hasn't really spent a lot of time studying the issue. And so they, the vision that a liquid democratic world offers them is that there are people, they already have a representative. Right now, these questions are currently being asked in the halls of Congress, and we all have representatives that are supposed to be, that we put in place to help us, to help represent us on these issues. But in a liquid system, there might be people that we trust more on these issues, and there might be people that we trust more specifically on the issue of foreign policy. And so there's something really powerful about being able to say, okay, this is who I trust, and then this is who they trust on this particular narrow issue. And then maybe that person, it's an even more nuanced question, and so that's who they trust. And so you have this dynamic of being able to identify subject area expertise in a truly accountable and open way. The thing that we have discovered makes a lot of people feel really uncomfortable is when those multiple layers of trust are not transparent. A huge number of people, surprisingly, maybe it should be obvious in retrospect, but people want to know what happens to their vote. So if they're proxying their vote to person A, and person A is proxying to person B, and person B is proxying to person C, it's important to be able to see that entire trust network, that chain of trust, chain of delegations. And in our earlier model, that wasn't possible. You could only see the immediate person, and you sort of had to trust, well, how did they reach their conclusion? And so now the way we do it is you can only public votes are being proxied. And so if your representative is going extra layers deep, they think this is the best decision, this person has the best opinion on this matter, you as an individual can see how that process was reached. You can see the person that you trusted immediately, and who, if it's an automatic delegation, if there is that automatic proxy there, or if they're just manually picking their favorite argument, like what we call endorsing. You can see that. So yeah, we want to provide the tools for privacy, but always demand that with your vote, you need to be able to see where your vote is going. And so being private does sacrifice some of the influence that you would have otherwise. And so just to round this off, by default on the Liquid system, votes that you inherit from a proxy are not public. Any vote that you automatically are picking up from your proxy stop at you. You cast your vote on their behalf, but that's it. You can always go in and choose to make that public on that particular issue. Or if you want, you can choose to make all of your votes public by your inherited proxy votes public by default, and then it would also pass down to all the people proxying to you. But yeah, we want, although it means there's less total vote numbers, which is a bit of a detriment for demonstrating traction and usage and engagement and all that. Our fundamental value is always privacy first, and so we default to, and votes that you inherit do not get passed down. And what that means is that other people can't see who you are proxying to by default either. Who you are proxying to by default is totally private.
Final thoughts?
Final thoughts are that this is the model that we have, that we think makes the most sense in terms of understandability, transparency, accountability, offering privacy options. It's certainly not the only option. It's been iterated upon as we've gone, and it's almost certainly not the best option either. So please do reach out if you have questions or suggestions or critiques. And also, to the extent that you want to build a competing model, build a competing model. I mean, the more experiments, the point is just that we need to be getting these ideas out there. And it's important for all of us, if we want to live in the best world possible, to have options here. So yeah, the more the merrier. I mean, these are really important things to be discussing, and important things to do well, important things. I mean, we're talking about questions of how we decide, how we allocate trillions of dollars of our collective budget that we're all spending. And just tax day was a few days ago, and I just sent a lot more money than I would have liked to, because for whatever reason, I had to pay more. And likewise, what activities we're criminalizing, and what ways we're using all of our collective resources, and setting out different rules. And so these are incredibly important things, and there's not enough public discussion that really gets into the details of what sort of actionable steps we can do to move things forward. And so I encourage and invite more people to be having these conversations and bring up critiques and tell us how we're wrong and all the things like that.
It's so important to consider this question. What do I desire?